Hey Wire Monkeys, welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Cabling. This episode, we're talking about cable combing. Should you do it or should you not do it?
Let's talk cabling. Yeah, let's talk cabling. Copper fiber structured right. Voicing day to day and night. Get connected, stay connected, do it right.
So welcome to the show where we tackle the tough questions submitted by installers, estimators, project managers, ICT personnel, where we are connecting at the human level so that we can connect the world. If you're watching this show on YouTube, would you mind hitting the bell button and the subscribe button to be notified when new content is being produced? If you're listening to us on one of the audio podcast platforms, would you mind leaving us a 5-star rating? Those simple little steps helps us take on the algorithm so we can educate, encourage, and enrich the lives of people in the ICT industry. Thursday nights, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. What are you doing? You know I do a live stream, right? I do it on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, where you get to ask your favorite RCDD, and you know that's me, questions about installation, certification, estimation, project management. I even do career path questions. But I can hear you now. But Chuck, I'm driving my truck at 6 p.m. on Thursdays. I don't want to crash and get into an accident. Not a problem. I got you covered. They're recorded, and you can find them at letstalkcabling.com. And finally, while this show is free and will always remain free, if you find value in this content, would you mind clicking on that QR code right there? You can buy me a cup of coffee. You can even schedule a 15-minute one-on-one call with me, after hours, of course. And you also can visit our Amazon link page on the webpage where you can see the tools and stuff that we recommend, and then I'll make a small stipend off that. You won't pay more, but I'll make a small commission off. All that stuff goes back in helping pay for the podcast. On this episode, I wanted to address cable combing. This is one of those topics that almost always starts an argument on the internet. Not that it takes a whole lot to start an argument on the internet nowadays, but you want to start an argument, it's to use Velcro or tie wraps. That's one. Union or non-union. That's another. And then the third one is, should you cable comb or not cable comb? Because technicians are opinionated about it. Now, I know I've got my feelings on it, but I wanted to bring in a fellow subject matter expert on this. So I want to welcome to the show, first time, Mr. Henry Frank. Henry, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Chuck. Thank you. And there's actually a fourth way to start an argument. Because do you know what RCDD really stands for?
Really can't do diddly?
Nope. Royal Canadian Donut Designer.
Oh, okay. yeah. I don't like
as a Canadian, that's what we called it.
Yeah, I don't like the really can't do diddly because it kind of downplays the RCDD, but I've heard lots of them over the years, but I've never heard the donut one, the donut design. I like that one.
Oh yeah. Well, you know, you can't throw a stone in Canada without hitting the Tim Hortons, so.
That's a fact. That's a fact. I've been to Canada a couple times. I've been up here to teach classes. I've done classes in Toronto. I even went to a small little town called Smiths Falls or some little mining town. It only had like one hotel in the whole entire place. So It was a pretty interesting place. I love teaching up there. I just don't like coming back to the U.S. because when I'm coming back, I've got my Black Pelican cases loaded up with gear. Mm-hmm. And you would think that I was on the 10 most wanted list, coming back in with all the kind of gear,
Yes, sir.
It is what it is. So for the people who may not know you, Henry, why don't you go ahead and give yourself an introduction? Tell us who you are, how you got in this industry, who you work for, so we can build some credibility.
Yeah, absolutely. So Henry Frank, and right now my day job is with Belden, and I'm the Smart Building Solutions consulting team leader for the Americas. So if you're working with us and working with my team, that's who I work for as my day job. But then the company's also gracious enough to sponsor me to participate in industry standards. My background is much like yours, Chuck. You and I both started out in the field. I started out in the 80s. After leaving university, I started being an installer and worked my way up. throughout the industry into different jobs. Every time somebody said, "Do you want to try this?" the answer was yes. So I encourage everybody that's listening, especially if you're an installer, try something. And if you like it, do it. And if you don't, keep doing what you're doing. That's fine. But keep growing, keep learning. And back in the late 90s, I was really interested about industrial networks and how they were evolving. And, I saw Ethernet and structured cabling taking over the world. So I became part of standards. And I've made that part of my day job. So the company supports me. So I'm the chair of the TIA TR42 Engineering Standards Committee. So whenever you hear people talking about, 568 for generic cabling, or 942 for data centers, or 1179 for healthcare, that's those engineering committees. Much like Bixby has the committees for the RCDD and for its standards, the Telecommunications Industry Association also has a group of engineers that create standards, and so I participate in that. And the reason I do is because even though I work for a vendor, I don't know how to make a cable. I don't know how to make a fiber or a copper cable. I look at it from the customer perspective, and I've always found that was something that was missing in standards. So I asked them to continue to support my work there so I could represent the same people that you're serving, Chuck, the builders of these networks, the designers of these networks, and the users of these networks. So that's my background.
Nice.
I've been doing this.
So you must run in the same circles as Jonathan Jew.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Jonathan Jew is a precious resource of our organization. And there will be a collective outcry. It's sort of, we'll hear a disturbance in the force if and when he ever retires. And I just have to force him to retire later than me so that it doesn't bother me too much. Because he is the editor of so many documents and contributes so heavily. Mm-hmm. It's amazing.
Yeah, he's a lot of times I've got a complete set of the copy of the TI standards. The podcast bought them. I've got them here, and finding some. It's funny because I've read the standards, but sometimes somebody will ask me a question about the standards. I'm like, I know I've read that, and then trying to find it because I have it in print form, not in PDF file. So it's kind of harder to find it in print form. So Jonathan Jew is my go-to. I usually shoot a message, hey, I know the standard says this, but where does it say that again? I mean, literally, within 20 minutes, boom, I got a response back from him. And he's like, oh, here it is. And he is just, this industry, like you said, and when he retires, this industry is going to take a hit. It really will.
And this industry is built upon the backs of people that give back. Yes. This is part of what I love about this industry. I mean, you and I and Jonathan and guys like Ray Emplett, who sadly passed away this year, were people that built this industry through School of Hard Knocks. Mm-hmm. So it was really in its infancy in the 80s and 90s as we all did this. And it requires that continued investment and commitment and that community that I don't think it exists really anywhere else. So for those of you listening, please participate, whether it's Bixby, TIA, or however you can. You're in a great industry, and the more you give the industry, the more the industry is going to give back to you.
Yeah, one of the things I like to tell people all the time, and I usually do this when Jonathan's on the show. I usually tell people, look, you don't have to be a PhD in electronics. You just have to have a giving heart to want to give this, because I guarantee you there's some part of experience that you've got that you can go to this group and you can bring that valuable information. You don't have to be a subject matter expert. You don't have to be an RCDD. You don't have to have that, like I said, that PhD. You just have to have the heart to serve. And from serving on committees, I've never served on a standards committee, but I've served on a couple Bixby committees, and one of the things I learned pretty quickly is it's like free training. You learn a lot of stuff. And how do you calculate the, what's the word I'm looking for? You can tell it's first show of the year because I don't have all the words in my head right now. How can you calculate the benefit? There it is. How can you calculate the benefit of all the relationships that you build from those committee meetings?
And I'm glad you brought up relationships because, people will look, like I expanded, I talked about my team earlier. Like I expanded my team, I doubled my team, and people said, hey, we want to hire more people. Can we get another you? It's like, you're never going to get another me. No one is ever going to be able to replace Chuck
Right.
or Bob or Anna or Rita or Christy or whoever is in your team, because we're some of our experience and expertise, and that's all different. But it's that relationship word that you keyed in on is when I first, and don't let this ever scare you away from participating in Bixie or NECA or any industry organization. At first, you're going to be overwhelmed, and you're going to say, "Oh my God, there's all these people that are smarter than me," and that was certainly my first reaction. And then you're going to realize we all put our pants on one leg at a time.
Yep.
They're not really any smarter than you. They might have more experience than you, and they might have more expertise than you. But the way they get that is through their relationships.
Right.
So the value that a person like you bring, Chuck, or myself to my organization and my colleagues isn't with what I know, it's with the relationship networks.
Right.
Like you said, it's like it's like phone a friend. I got to phone Jonathan. And again, Ray Emplet was, there's only so much room on my desktop, and I'm not a grounding and bonding expert. So as soon as something grounding and bonding shows up on my desktop, it gets pushed off. I push it off quicker rather than later. But then participating in standards is like, okay, I know who Mark Harger is. I know who Ray Emplet is. I can phone them and get an answer, or email them or text them or whatever. And that's really the benefit of participation and community. I hope we never lose that spirit, because there's too many things that are nuanced, like our discussion about combing, where if you just read the available literature online, I talk about a knowledge hierarchy. We talk about big data. Well, data is only ones and zeros, and then it becomes information, and then you have to take it from data to information to knowledge to wisdom, and you add context. And that is more forward looking. The data is more historical, backwards facing, and you need to be able to filter it. You may have some great Google kung fu, but if you don't understand the contents and the nuance, sometimes it'll lead to the wrong direction.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. And before I get keen on that, I want to say I'm glad to know that I wasn't the only one who felt intimidated the first time I sat in them committee meetings. I'm looking at these guys, and these are industry titans, because I've seen them around Bixie conference and stuff, and they're kind of like almost like the rock stars and stuff. And I'm like, I'm in the same room with these guys,
Yeah.
And you learn so much. You learn so much, and it's absolutely a great thing to do. And you mentioned about like bonding and grounding. That is kind of one of my fortes. I'm not going to say
Okay.
I'm not a bonding and grounding engineer, but I have a lot of experience I was a volunteer firefighter for about 5 years. So safety is really one of my key things. So fire stopping and bonding and grounding. So I'm really fluent with what the standards say to do and when you should do it and all this stuff. Although I'm still trying to find somebody to come on the show to explain at a technician level, not an engineer level, ground loops, what they are, and how do you find them? How do they? Because that's one of those gray nebulous areas in our industry that everybody says, well, that's going to cause a ground loop. And I've talked to engineers offline, and they're like, yeah, that's not a ground loop. That's not a ground loop. So,
well, bad news and good news. Bad news for you. Good news for me is I have no clue on how to explain that. Remember, bonding and grounding off my desktop. Good news is, and again, this highlights the importance of relationship. I do have a couple names, so I'll follow up with you. And before I out them, live on camera, I'll
Don't call the names out here just in case, because I found that a lot of people are willing to come on this show. The biggest fear that they usually have is they think that they're going to be talking to a large group of people, and yes, you will be talking to a large group of people, but recorded. I'm really good at editing, right? So you meet me in person, if you ever see me walk around a Bixie conference, I am nowhere near as articulate as I am on the podcast, because I'm really good at video editing,
Right. And people like you and I will never be company spokespeople.
Right.
We'll never be marketing experts.
Right.
But I hope that we all have credibility because we're earnest.
Yeah.
We may misspeak. We may use colloquialisms. We may drop the occasional expletive. But I think that shows a candor.
Yes.
As opposed to pandering.
Right. Yes.
And so I love to make fun of marketing people when I make my speeches and say, I'm not going to be perfect.
Yep.
Far from it. But that's okay. I don't need to work in marketing. I work in the real world.
There you go. Where the rubber meets the road. So you wrote
and hopefully marketing people never in my organization never watch my presentations when I say that, because otherwise they'd be grossly offended because it's another valuable skill that I just don't have.
Yeah. So you had mentioned earlier about how the information changes and stuff. And this is why I wanted to, I don't remember how I came across your article. You must have posted it on LinkedIn, and then, because I don't remember if you and I were friends before I reached out to you or not. I don't remember, but somehow it popped up in my feed. And
yeah, we were connections, but hadn't talked a lot, and it probably popped up in your feed because there's a lot of tribal knowledge that we're losing.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and that's why, like, how long ago did you write that article? Just out of curiosity, do you remember?
I think it was sometime last year, but it's been something that's. So I have a whole laundry list of these articles that I'm working on with marketing's help and our professional writer to clean up my language. But it's been a sore point for years because there's a lot of myth and misconceptions in our industry about guidelines.
Yes.
You talked about the fight zip ties versus Velcro. Use zip ties if you want. Use stainless steel zip ties that you sharpen the edges if you want. Just make sure you don't over cinch them, and just make sure that they're not on a bend so they don't disturb or cut the jacket.
Right.
Now, considering they have sharp edges and sharpening them would make it more difficult, you'd have to ask your question, why in the heck would you want to?
But there's always going to be a place for them, though. There's always going to be a place for them. Especially if like you're tie wrapping like interduct or maybe some high pair count backbone cabling, stuff like that. And a lot of technicians, their preference is to use tie wraps in the cable tray on the floor, but then use Velcro in the telecom rooms.
Yeah.
And that's, you're right, that's another thing. But what I was tying into was, and this just kind of shows you why our industry is so confused, right?
Yes.
There was, and this kind of what keyed me in, like when I saw this post, and I can't remember where I saw the post. It was on, I want to say it was Facebook, but I can't say it. But somebody said, look, Fluke says you should randomize your cable. Fluke, a well-known company in our industry. They're considered thought leaders. And don't get me wrong, Fluke's a great company. They got a lot of great engineers. And so I went and luckily the guy put the link in there. And I went and looked at the link. The article was from like 2009.
Yep.
Dude, that's old news. That's old news. You got to be careful, especially with our industry. When you look up information, when was it published?
Yes.
When was it published?
What was the context? So alien crosstalk has always been an issue, but we've never defined it. We've never quantified it. We've never created the guidance around it like we did until we came to category 6A. Is crosstalk or alien crosstalk from one cable to another cable instead of between pairs? Sorry to waggle my fingers at you. It's always been an issue.
Mm-hmm.
But it became a bigger issue when we got to category 6A because we were trying to do 10 gig signals, which, the closer to the edge that you go, there's the smaller margin for error, if you look at it that way, including crosstalk. An alien crosstalk, which again is between adjacent cables.
Right.
And so I always loved combed cables.
It's a statement of pride in your workmanship.
That is exactly why. Because if I see a nicely combed job and a neatly done job, I'm almost guaranteed that it's going to be done right and that it's going to work because somebody took pride in their installation.
Yes.
So for people that are old like you and I, like thick wire Ethernet where you had, if you have a really old building, you might see this yellow thick wire Ethernet cable about the size of your thumb.
You're talking
Every
about
2
thick
point
net?
something. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Every couple meters, you'll see a black band.
Yep, that's
where we
thick
would have
net.
to put- And we had a guy that was so good when you used to put your thick wire in a telecom room, you had to loop it.
Yep.
He figured out how to make the Olympic rings, and he had a system of doing it. So those black rings where you'd put the transceivers with the vampire taps would be on the bottom of all the Olympic rings.
Nice.
And so you knew as soon as you walked in that he was eliminating chances for error, eliminating chances for things to be done incorrectly. And because he took pride in workmanship and pride in ownership, the customer was satisfied. And that's the same reason I'll say, skip to the end, comb your cables. If you want to take pride in your workmanship, do it. Not saying that having things loosely arranged isn't appropriate sometimes. If I'm doing something, and again, I'll use the example of like a temporary sporting event where, I'm going to go in one day and out the next. Not that it should be a randomized rat's nest, but you don't necessarily have to have it combed.
Right.
But if I see something combed, I know somebody took pride of ownership. And again, it's not an issue for alien crosstalk with a caveat. So if you're dealing with a reputable manufacturer, any of the ones that you can name off the top of your head, the top 10 manufacturers or, whatever manufacturers, top 5 or top 10 manufacturers in the Americas, you will not have a problem with alien crosstalk. Because what we do is, as manufacturers, when you're designing a cable, you have engineers that do it. Engineers always work to the worst case. When you build a building, in Canada, you worry about snow load. So you calculate what's the most amount of snow. You might have 20 feet of snow on your roof. So let's calculate the snow load for 20 feet of snow. Using the analogy of alien crosstalk where you have, your victim cable and then your aggressor cable doing signaling. And I can't give you I don't have enough fingers to do the 6 around 1. But if you look at a honeycomb is arranged in a 6 around 1 scenario.
Mm-hmm.
You have your center cable, and then there's the 6 cables around. So you would have 6 aggressor and 1 victim in the middle. That's the worst case for alien crosstalk. Right. Because we don't know how things are going to be done in the field, because there's variabilities in the field, cables get bent, the geometry gets changed, you might be installing next to lights or power cables or anything else. We always have to take the worst case scenario. Mm-hmm. So a reputable manufacturer, again, any of the top list, will go and test everything in a 6 around 1 configuration for a full 100-meter channel, 90-meter permanent link, where what we do is, because I've seen it in the lab and I've seen our setup and I've seen other people's setups, because you see it when they give the testing and standards, is they go 6 around 1 and then they go and tape it up either with like a mesh grip, or they tape it or tie wrap it every meter for the 90 meters. And then they test for alien crosstalk just to make sure it's not a problem. So that's what the manufacturers do. The myth around not doing that is because, you don't always have reputable manufacturers. So some of the offshore stuff, some of the really weird, hey, I can find it for $1.99 on Google type stuff.
Amazon's got Cat 6A for $32 1,000 feet.
Yeah.
You get what you pay for.
Exactly. Oh, and you see some of the things, and they can't even spell category right.
Exactly.
Which is a dead giveaway. So go to the CCCA website. CCCA, so 3 C's and an A. That's a group of manufacturers. It's an industry organization like Bixby or TIA, but not as well known. But they come out with a lot of content about this, and they talk about counterfeits and things. But again, while we were all doing the testing, while we were developing the cables, if you remember your physics 101 from high school, you have your right-handed rule, and hopefully my camera's flipped, so it's showing the right-handed rule. Otherwise, it looks like I'm holding up my left-handed, my left fist, which is what not to do. So if any of you are taking electricity and magnetism, and you're right-handed, put your pencil down when you're doing your test, because then otherwise, instead of doing the right-handed rule, You'll do the left, and that's how you'll fail E&M the first time, like I did. But if you remember your high school physics, the worst case for interference is conductors in parallel.
Right.
The best case is conductors perpendicular. And that's where that guidance came about randomization. So the best thing you can do is not have things in parallel. So the reason that guidance came out is because in category 6A, the A stands for nothing. Doesn't stand for anything at all. That's another myth that we can talk about. People call it augmented Cat 6, which it's not. But when we were testing Cat 6 for higher speeds, we noticed the problem of alien crosstalk. And they said, what's going on? Well, with poorly designed cables, this is going into the engineering behind it, it's balance between the pairs. So the difference between a 4-conductor cable, waggling my fingers at you, and a 2-pair cable, they're both 4-conductor cables, but only a 2-pair cable, or in the case of our category cable, a 4-pair cable, is because there's balance between the pairs. That's why you'll see different twists on blue, orange, green, and brown. And you'll see different recipes depending on the manufacturer, depending on the part number. They have different recipes, just like a chocolate cake. You have 1,000 different chocolate cake recipes. They're all chocolate cake. But they do that. They have different twist lays, different ways of twisting it per inch, more or less, clockwise or anti-clockwise, to keep the randomization going. And that's why we do all this testing. But when you have all those neatly cloned, historical cables in a tray, Cat 5e, Cat 6, which weren't tested for alien crosstalk, we had a how to augment your cable plant if you have to go beyond 1 gig, and things like, swapping out your connectivity to a higher grade of connectivity, or randomizing the bundles. So instead of having them all neatly combed, just have them all sort of randomization so you don't have the parallel effect going on. And so that became, because that was published in a TSB because the final document wasn't ready, it became a rule. And that myth just kept growing and growing and growing. And this is why participation in standards or in BICSI or your industry organization is important, because anybody can read it in a book. We could create an iPhone app for the BICSI TDM. We could create an iPhone app for the TIA family of standards. But there's all the context that's missing. It's not just what's in there, but why things aren't or how things get in there. So once we did the testing, any reputable manufacturer can go 6 around 1, because we have to offer warranties around that for that full 90 meters. So as far as I'm concerned, comb your cables. It shows pride in workmanship. It'll get, you as a technician called back to a job, so long as you're not, finally combing it, right. Like combing the desert, using that old Spaceballs analogy. As long as you're not taking too long, they're going to call you back because it shows pride in your work. You're going to have better yields. The thing's going to work right the first time because you're taking pride in your work. And because you're taking pride in your work, your customers are going to want you back. Your partners are going to want you back. If you want to go to the ultimate version of combing, do a search for lacing cables.
Yes.
The telcos used to do this with lacing threads, and it was a skill. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, look up Sean Rep. Sean Rep's all over social media. That guy is a cable dressing artist. Even in my best day, I was only half as good as him. And you could put, for those who don't know what cable combing is, it's just a practice of bundling your cable. So literally where you can put your finger on any one of the cables on the outside bundle and then follow it all the way down, all the way across the rack, all the way down the panel. There's none diving in and out and all this stuff. And what I wanted to add to that was, if somebody's paying that attention to detail to something as simple as dressing a cable, then what the important stuff, the testing, the terminations, those are going to be done right because they pay the attention to details, to the small details. And there are some companies, like I said, I've got a lot of installation experience. There are some customers out there who are early adopters of technology and stuff like that, but they also like to have the best of the best. And they're willing to pay extra for that beautifully cable comb job. That's another argument you get into. Some people argue about is why spend all that extra time? Why not just throw it in there? Yeah. Okay.
But Chuck, let's turn that around. I want the customer that wants it combed because they realize it has value.
Mm-hmm.
And if they realize they have value, they're willing to pay for a good contractor instead of the myth and misconception of two Bobs in the truck. Because you can be a small outfit and still do really great work. Some of the best outfits I know are small outfits, essentially a two Bob in a truck. But if you're doing good work and a customer doesn't want to pay for that good work, it also works in reverse.
Yes.
So, from a customer perspective, seeing good workmanship should attract you to them, should make you want to keep you. By the same token, if you're working for a customer that just says, slap it in, I don't care, just throw it in, why do I not want to put a wiring closet in a janitor's closet above the sink?
Yes.
If they don't care, they're not going to value your work or your craft.
Nope.
Or your skill or your experience.
Nope.
So, those are the people where you're always going to have to win the race to the bottom. Oh, somebody's going to do it for $200 a drop, and then it's going to be $199, $198, and so on. And as they keep Googling, that you're just going to have to keep winning the race to the bottom every time because they don't value quality.
Until you find that two Bobs in a truck, it'll do for $125 a run.
Yeah.
Or I don't know if you guys have this term up in Canada, but down here in the U.S. we call them trunk slammers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we when I used to be a technician, one of our biggest competitors were trunk slammers, and they did piecework. So at the time it was showing my age because not only was it it was in the 1900s, it was the last century of the last millennium. They were putting in drops for like $15 a drop, $20 a drop for labor.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'd say, it's like $15 a drop. We'll do anything. And they were always hiring, and they always had ads in there. And again, when you see those trunk slammers out there, those piecework type guys, it's a great conversation with your client too, because it's sort of a win fast, lose fast. They said, well, how come you can't compete with company X? Because company X says they'll do every drop for $15. That's like, okay, well, here's the newspaper article for, again, showing my age, the newspaper article with the ad for labor. Company X is looking for installers. We pay minimum wage, no experience necessary. It's like, okay, is this who you want, Mr. Customer? Like, seriously. And maybe there was a myth that data was a convenience or a nice to have.
Oh, it's a requirement nowadays.
But data is becoming absolutely mission. Like they talk about mission critical systems, and everybody goes to, data centers right away.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm a hospital, when I'm on that hospital bed, that really, stealing from Monty Python, the most expensive machine, the machine that's supposed to go bing, better go bing when I'm on the freaking table.
I'm a huge Monty Python fan. And my wife isn't. And I tell her all the time, there are two types of people in this world. Monty Python fans and the people who just don't get it. And I say that all the time. Every time I get in an elevator, I always say, quick, get the machine that goes bing.
Yeah. As soon as I'm in a hospital, I use that, and I use that analogy with people. But it's absolutely mission critical. Yes. It's like, how many people, okay, you have convenience Wi-Fi in a hotel. But I guarantee you, if you go to that hotel and that Wi-Fi doesn't work, you're either looking for another room at the very least, or for sure you're going to be never going into that hotel again,
or not using that chain ever again.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's not convenient. Like when a retail store loses its point of sale because everything's now connected to the cloud, they shut down. Because they can't work in isolation.
And how would a company factor in how much money they lose because a network went down? How do they factor in replacing that lost data? How do they factor in the human labor it's going to take to regenerate that data again? And then these are critical things that can happen if you don't pay attention to the details.
Yes,
and cause problems in the long run.
Right, and this is why that quality of workmanship is important. And it's not just for things like combing and alien crosstalk, which is why we created it. Because there's another myth around combing that's not alien crosstalk related. But if you hear about things like limited power, limited power was just a way of marketing people to create fear, uncertainty, and doubt. To say, oh my God, what happens if, my and sorry for using my sarcasm voice, what happens if, oh my God, I'm using power over this cable, it's going to melt and it's going to start a fire. It's like, well, wait a minute. That's not going to be the cable's fault. What happens if your toaster fries out? You blow the breaker. If I go to any wire in my house and take my snips and cut it, what happens? A, I get shocked because I'm stupid. But B, my house doesn't go on fire because I've tripped the breaker.
Right.
So having the right cable for the right job is important. But this whole myth about, oh my God, limited power cable and power over Ethernet, things are going to go on fire is absolutely ridiculous. Right. We talk about 100 watts of power for a category cable. And they'll talk about loosely bundling things. Well, if you look at how the limited power requirements were taken care of, they did the same thing. They did 6 around 1, and then I forget what the number is past that. So they just kept making the honeycomb. You got 1, and then you got the 6 around the 1, and then the honeycomb gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then what you have to do is you have to tightly bundle that every meter for the full 90 meter channel. Take your PoE, run it at full power, okay, and because your devices have their power rating, say at 100 watts, but they don't draw anything close to that. Like most devices are still in the low single digits or low double digits for power consumption on average. And then you have to tightly bundle them together, then put them in an environment with no airflow, with a high ambient temperature, and then, yes, you might have temperature rise that exceeds the recommendation of the manufacturer. The reason I'm saying it's not a problem is well before you get to the point where they're going to melt or do anything else, the temperature gets so high that the Ethernet part of the power over Ethernet doesn't work. And as soon as Ethernet doesn't work, the power cuts off.
The insertion loss will go through the roof as soon as you start getting hot.
Exactly. The only time it's a problem is if you take your category 6A cable, take all the whites and all the colors, twist them together, and replace them for an 18 gauge lamp cord. Because I know people are doing that every day. And again, that's my sarcasm voice in there. So even with things like that, what you have to realize is that, the worst place that you have for power, when you talk about bundling, and hey, when TIA came out with their power over Ethernet, they said, keep them loose, keep them randomized, don't bundle them too tight. Again, that's the engineers doing it from a 6 around 1, and then, just keeping the honeycomb getting bigger into your hundreds of cables, and then discovering a problem when every single one of those hundreds of cables is drawing full 100 watt power at, 30 degrees C ambient temperature, and the temperature rise gets too high. It's like, is that really the case? When is the only time those cables are closely bundled together? So in a data center where you're not really using PoE anyway. But let's say something like a hospital or a university or a hospitality or stadium network. The only time they're really bundled that close together is for that short 3 to 5 meters while they're in the telecommunication space that, by the way, is air conditioned. So you don't generally have that problem. When was the last time you went and grabbed the cable bundle and go, oh, God, that's hot. That's at 40 degrees C. I'm ready to burn my hand. These things practically don't happen. People think about the worst case scenario, but the reality is I have my tight bundle of cable in the telecom room. And as soon as I go through that penetration, what happens? All my cables do this.
Yep, they break open, goes away. Randomized. But the good thing is if you follow, that's why I like, if you follow the rules, again, it's going to guarantee that cable plant's going to work 99, the old Dove commercials, 99 and 44 100ths of a time. It's always going to work, right? And let me ask you this: since you're heavily involved in the standards, right? You give your CMP LP, CMR LP, and they're actually even referenced in the standards. There's a table. There's a 725 144, I think it is, that says what's maximum bundle sizes for PoE, and it gives you the number of cables based on the conductor size and amperage and stuff like that. But it says in the verbiage that the table is null and void if you use LP cable.
Right. And then you have to go to the manufacturer and look at their ratings. And I can't speak for all manufacturers because I work for one, but I don't work for them all and I don't study them all. But I can say, from my own experience, from who I work for, when you look at the bundle size, it's like, okay, I'm not worried about it.
Right.
I rarely have bundle sizes that big.
Right.
And when I do, they're not all drawing power at the same time.
Yeah, because some of the bundle sizes in the NEC are huge. And I think the Bixby best practice, if I remember correctly, is 24 to a bundle, if I remember right. So that's still even far below than what the NEC allows you to go up to.
Oh yeah. When we did because our engineers did the testing, and don't take this number as rote. You can look it up on the website. I don't even know what it's one of those things that's absolutely trivial, so it goes off the desktop. But our numbers are for like a 6A cable for Type 3 PoE, like 300 or 400 cables before you have a problem.
Yeah. And
I'm sure all the other top vendors out there in the Americas are the same, and it's like it's just not an issue. Right. So again, it all comes back to combing it, because if you're combing it, you're taking pride in your work. And that's why you have that 3 nines, 4 nines, 5 nines reliability. Because if they take that much care in their dressing, they're going to take care of the termination. And if they're taking care of the termination, I'm assured that they're going to do the right testing. And when it comes to, again, alien crosstalk testing, and I'm circling back around to that topic just because this is something I often get from technicians and contractors, Chuck, is they'll say, vendor A, B, C, D, through their warranty and certification program, they don't require testing for alien crosstalk. And that's true for those vendors, A, B, C, and D. But just because and this is it's not a fight, but it's consternation for the contractors. They'll say, you don't want me to do alien crosstalk testing. It's like, no, I don't care because I've done worst case. But sometimes, again, people that don't know better write it into their specifications.
Right.
So if it's written in the construction specification that you have to do alien crosstalk testing, either in whole or in part,
you're doing alien crosstalk testing. That's what you're doing.
You're stuck doing it. Yeah. Now, if you want to go and use that as a value engineering option to say, hey, rather than me doing alien crosstalk testing, reach out to a person like Chuck or myself or whoever your manufacturer's rep is. They'll probably write you a letter saying that, we'll certify without testing it. But I would rather have you invest in work. Instead of spending money on doing alien crosstalk testing, I'd rather have you invest money in doing the combing, because then I know the pride of the ownership's there.
Mm-hmm. So what changed in the cable? Because like I said, I know when Cat 6.8 first came out, you said and I remember this too. I mean, there was a lot of manufacturers saying randomize. And now most manufacturers now will say, well, you can cable comb or randomize, whichever you want to do. We're fine with it. So what changed within the cable? It's still Cat 6.8 cable.
It's people did all the testing. So that guidance came out and was a holdover from the TSB. And again, I forget the TSB, like TSB alphabet soup. I know it's a 3-digit letter, whether it's 184 or whatever it is, we can look it up and put it in the notes later. It talked about testing for augmented testing procedures and troubleshooting procedures, just like we did when, so you and I are old enough to remember the category 5 to category 5E. Often everybody just calls it category 5, which isn't actually correct. It's actually 5E. But you and I are old enough to remember when category 5 was a category and then 5E was different. And remember when we came up with those testing guidelines, like what happens if your Cat 5E system doesn't pass Cat 5E? What do you have to do? And there was, reduce the number of untwists on your termination. There was randomization of cables. There was try changing to new patch cords. Then the next step was try replacing the jacks. And then if that didn't work, then replace the cable, which is absolutely ludicrous. But that's the way you have to think about it as an engineer, because no one's going to go through all that stuff and test it and then go, hey, it didn't pass Cat 5e. Maybe I'm going to go and loosen all my bundles and test everything again. Oh, that still didn't work, so I'm going to go and replace all my patch cords and test it again. Oh my God, that still didn't work. I'm going to go and replace. Like, you know what I mean? Like, when it doesn't pass, you're just going to replace it.
Yep.
And so it's absolutely nonsensical. But God love engineers. And again, these guys are way, to your point.
Yep.
You're going to be intimidated if you join these things because these people are way smarter than you ever will be.
Yep.
Like, the number of PhDs it outnumbers the number of people in the room, for God's sake.
Yeah, we definitely need more field people, more installation people,
yes.
more project managers involved
more
in the standards
people
committees.
to demand answers and demand that they write for the audience. And it's not faulting the people with the PhDs that can figure out how to do the twist lathes. It's just they've never been in the field, so they never had to worry about
right.
it.
And they don't. And here's the thing, right? I remember this because I took a college class one time. It was statistics, and even though I was an estimator, I was good with numbers. It was one of those college classes where it was statistics 101, 102. So you had to take two of them back to back. And I remember halfway through the first class, I'm like, I'm going to fail this class because the teacher was not teaching. He was teaching at the PhD level, not our level. And I mean, it was just going over my head,
Absolutely. So this is why that same thing came about. So it's like, hey, if we have category 5e or 6 systems and we want to go beyond a gigabit, what are we going to do?
Right.
And then because remember, Cat 6a came out and Cat 7 even before that. So don't even talk.
No, let's not talk about Cat 7 on this show. Well, that's a different subject.
Yeah, that's a discussion for another day. So that's like, Ron has a good blog on that. Why put a spoiler on a Pinto?
Exactly.
Hey, I want to put Mickeys on my Pinto. It's like, okay, you can, but why the heck would you want to? And sorry, guys, you're gonna have to look up what Mickey tires are
and what a Pinto is.
But so when we were developing Cat 6a, the 10 gig IEEE interfaces didn't even exist. Okay, they were starting to be developed, so we knew how they were going to start doing things, how they were going to start to do it, and we realized that alien crosstalk was going to be an issue. And we, again, hey, we have all these things that we have to worry about. So if I have to worry about alien crosstalk, I'm going to worry about alien crosstalk to here.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the reality is here, just like we talked about with power. And so because the electronics weren't available, people overcompensated. So they came out with all these guidelines that included same things. It's like, undo less twists, change your patch cords, change your connectors, change your cable. And before it was change your cable, it was randomize your cable. And then that suddenly just became a rule.
Right.
Right. And again, when people were failing, and not faulting Fluke or Viavi or any of the testing manufacturers. But if you're testing and you fail, you have to try and find a way to pass. That's the reality. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to try and go from least offensive to most offensive. So least offensive is if I can just randomize the cables and it works, okay, great. But if alien crosstalk, that's much of a problem. The amount of I've never seen it done in the field. I'd love to see some practical examples where, hey, I just randomized a bit and made the bundles a little loose and it worked out. It's just a historical thing where all of these guidelines came out,
right?
Before there was even an application. And so it just became hallowed antiquity. The old man on the hill said this, and this is this is why, what you're doing here, the BICSI manuals, the BICSI committees, the TIA committees, the NECA committees, where it's actually people collaborating is important to participate in.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I was saying earlier. That's why we need more installers and project managers in there, because that way they can hold the engineers accountable in those conversations.
Absolutely.
because that's who the standards are geared towards. The standards aren't geared to other PhDs. The standards are for the project managers, the estimators, the installers in the field. And if they can't read and understand it because the PhDs are talking, above them, then they're not even going to read the book. Look at the code book.
And
how many people don't read the code book because it's written in legalese?
And the code book, so again, we're going a little far afield, but I agree with everything you're saying. So this is why I still want to maintain my leadership of TIA for another couple of years, because I want us to change philosophically. Instead of writing for ourselves, it's like, so you have a bunch of manufacturers writing for themselves how to make their own cable. It's like, okay, well, you already know how to make your own cable. Half of your standards or more are for somebody else. Learn how to write for the audience, and I got to get us to do that. And so and there's a bunch of us in standards that are doing the same thing. People like you and me that may work for vendors, but we support contractors and end users and engineers, and we're trying to do that.
One of the things you mentioned in your article, and I hope you can expand on this, because I would have thought it'd been the opposite, but you were talking about the bundling, the 6x1, and the length of the cable and stuff. But you said in there that many manufacturers can't pass a 6-round configuration with 4 connectors in a shortened channel. See, I would think that alien crosstalk would be worse for longer distances. It'd be more likely to fail in longer. Why is a 4-connector channel failing in that shortened 24-meter channel?
It's not an alien problem at that point. And again, I'd have to get one of my engineers in there. It's a near end, far end issue. So short is an issue. Long tends to not be an issue, because think of it as like, you and I are literally thousands of miles apart, but imagine we're 100 miles apart. If I'm shouting to you, that's near that's the analogy for near end crosstalk. So all of those people can hear that. But if I can shut out the people that are going like this, and then I'm listening for Chuck, I know, and so this is what the electronics does. It filters out that loud interference, for lack of a better word, right? That near-end crosstalk, and it can filter it out, and the electronics always get better. So when we come up with the guidelines, we always plan for the worst, hope for the best, and the reality comes somewhere in the middle. But because you're always planning for the worst, that near-end crosstalk, because it's my transmission pairs, 1, 2, and 7, 8, it's like, I know what this is transmitting. So if I start to hear interference going the pattern of my waggly fingers on these fingers, I know it's these guys. So I just ignore it. And then its far end is, the same thing, the far end crosstalk. What happens is when channels get short, if you think about that, we're all shouting at each other. And so the electronic compensation and cancellation, and this is where I'll find you somebody much smarter than me if needed. But this is essentially what's happening is short is more difficult because you have all of those near and far end instances being almost at the same level, and it's hard to distinguish. And by having a 4-connector channel that is short, it gets even worse because then you get all those back reflections.
So for the layperson who might be listening to this show, what's your explanation of what a 4-connector channel is? Because I know a lot of people don't truly understand what that means.
Right. And so a 4-connector channel, and there's a slightly different way of explaining it for fiber, but slightly different terms. But let's essentially look at it. It's not 4 connectors, right? It's 4 connection matings. And you always exclude the equipment end and the equipment end. So if I'm going from server or switch to device, those connections where I'm plugging into my computer, I'm plugging into my switch, aren't included. But when I go from my patch cord, so I have a patch cord with a connector, another end plugged into the jack at the patch panel, that's one mated connection. And then assuming I have a cross connect, so I have an active to passive, where that other patch cord happens, that's your mated connection. So when you have a 4-connector topology, don't count up the number of connectors because you actually get more than that. It's where the connectors mate, right? So you have a jack in the case of of copper, you have a jack and a plug. So when a jack goes into a plug, that's one mated connection. So you can have 4 mated connections, excluding the ones on the outside, in a channel. Fiber is slightly different because there is no plug and jack. There's just 2 connectors mating through an adapter. Right? So we always call it jacks or we call it couplers, but they're really adapters. It's a really weird terminology thing. Is this whole tribal thing, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
you're either
LIU
cheering
versus
for the
fiber
Bills,
enclosure.
right? You're cheering for the Bills or you're wrong. Right?
Exactly.
I'll get all the hate from anybody that's not a Bills fan. But I'm close to Buffalo, so I have to cheer for the Bills. And it's the same thing with copper and fiber guys. So it's getting less. Sorry, I was going to say it's getting less so, but it's not. It's always being competitive. So this is why you have fiber people and copper people. They're like big brother, little brother. They're always going to fight. So this is why we have, white, blue, blue, white, white, orange, orange, white, white, green, green, white. Mm-hmm. But we have a 12 fiber color code where green is repeated twice in fiber. And then if you go to the extended color code, there's like 2 more shades of green in there. And they can't use tracers. And, so the fiber guys make fun of the copper guys and say, oh my God, we're so much smarter than you. You're cavemen. Oh my God, copper's so old. They were using that in the 1800s.
Oh, you're so right.
We're modern.
You're so right. The people who do fiber tend to look down on copper people. They absolutely do. Not all fiber
absolutely.
people. Not all fiber people. But there's a definite segment.
No. I'm saying is a generalization. Yeah. But then you got to go to the best comeback for that, because I used to have a guy that used to joke like that. One of the product engineers was a fiber guy. He goes, I'd ask him copper questions. He goes, I don't know. I'm not a caveman. It's like, oh, but you know what? Maybe, as an ex-copper guy, you should listen to the cavemen every once in a while, because copper guys are smart enough to figure out what type of cable it is, like category 3, 4, 5, 5E, 6, 7, 8, outside plant. We're smart enough to figure it out by reading a label. We don't have to color code it.
Exactly. Oh, I'm going to use
and
that.
And by the way, we're smart enough that when we do color code things, we don't have the same color for 2 different things. So we don't have OM1 and OM2 both being orange, and OM3 and OM4 both being aqua.
Right.
We're a little smart, and it's just sort of hilarious. It's that that ego or the culture of the people that work together. And once we get beyond all these things, it becomes a lot of fun. And another one of the great reasons why to participate in these industry organizations, because the more you know, the better off you're going to be in every part of your job.
Yeah. I want to add on to what you were just saying is, there's the, not the disconnect, but the between the copper and the fiber, but we're also in the industry of people who like to rav each other. We like all the time. So you add that layer on top of it. It can be kind of cool. So as a subject matter expert in the industry and a person who heavily involved in the standards, should I cable comb or should I not cable comb?
Absolutely, you should. If it's gonna display pride and ownership, absolutely. If it's gonna be in a spot that no one's gonna notice and it's gonna be difficult to do, then don't bother. Make it neat and clean. I'm never going to say not make it neat and clean, but if you're in a telecom room, you're in a data center, comb it. It's going to look better. Absolutely.
Henry, what a great show. I really didn't expect us to go this long on talking about cable combing, but we touched a lot of good stuff, and I got some ideas for some future stuff down the road that I'm going to have you come back on. We're going to have to talk more in depth about, man.
Let's talk about pathway fill, buddy, because the contractors and the technicians are the most important folks out there. Pathway fill and capacity calculation is one of the most misunderstood things in our industry. And I'm going to have to get some graphical things to help you with this. But somebody asked me for another quick blog on that. My rough notes was 8 pages long of bullet notes on how to do this properly.
8 pages? 8 pages?
Yep.
Holy cow.
Of things why this is important. And it was funny. The more initials people had on their name, the more I found they didn't know what they were talking about.
Yeah.
So when I had this issue, I had it with RCDDs who were also PNGs and had been in the industry for 20 years. And I wanted to have their PNG and RCDD revoked because some of the things that they were saying, that they were just like fun. It's like, you should not have the pride of that degree or that designation because you've got this information so wrong.
And
then I found as I started removing honorifics, the information got more accurate, and the most accurate information I got was from the first year apprentices.
Oh, absolutely, because they're fresh in it.
Because they're fresh in it. School of Hard Knocks built right into them.
That's one of the common questions I see a lot on social media is, how many Cat 6 cables can I get through a 1-inch pipe? I need a little bit more information to give you the answer to that. What size is the cable? Are you trying to go for a 40% fill or a 30% fill? How many 90-degree bends are in it? What's the length on it? Yeah. There's a lot of considerations. It's not just one thing or the other.
Now you know the deal. Subscribe and share the show. Help us spread the real. Stay connected. Do it right. Let's talk cabling. Let's talk cabling.